Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Gilda Hilaire, and I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager leading Marketing Cloud Trailblazer programs. Today, we're going to have a discussion on API best practice featuring marketing champions, Corinna, Tony, and Jenna. And just a little housekeeping before we get started. I know several of you submitted questions, but if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. We will try to address these questions during the presentation and at the end. Now, without further ado, I will turn the time over to Jenna, who will be moderating the session.
Morning,
Jenna, feel free to
everybody.
take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Corinna and Tony, for joining us and answering all these API questions that everybody sent in. Like Gilda said, if you have any questions during the session, please just type them into the questions box and we'll answer them as best we can. All right, so let's get started. All things API in the Marketing Cloud. Question number one, back to the basics. How do we set up an API?
So I'll take this one. I'll start off with this one. So there's a few things you got to do to set up the foundations for any kind of API integrations or calls that need to be made to the APIs. And that first initial thing you have to do is set up what's called an installed package within Marketing Cloud's setup. And it's there where you're going to get your client ID and your client secret that is essentially used to grant you that authentication token, which then you use for your sequential API calls. So for every API call that you make, you have to pass in that authenticated token and then interact with that specific endpoint for whatever you're trying to take care of or handle.
And I think that answered our second question was, I'm a beginner and I don't know what I don't know. So hopefully we'll cover more of that as we go on down through these questions here, and you'll have a better idea of what you don't know. All right, so next question is, what's the best way to start learning the APIs for Marketing Cloud?
So I can take this one, or Tony and I can both. So the way I started was I actually found, I believe it's Adam Spriggs that has a whole downloadable file set that you can put into Postman or whatever API tool that you want to use. And basically, I just started creating my own data extensions that I knew were separate from all of my live data, and just started tooling around with all the different calls within there. And then as I started having use cases, then I actually started building them out with the tool set that I had already provided from our community. And so now I've just kind of built off of that and developed my own set of and repository. But I started just basically Googling for how to set up a Salesforce Marketing Cloud API and found a great blog with a bunch of files.
Yeah, that's very, very accurate to how I got started as well. I knew almost nothing about APIs and interacting with them probably around a year or two ago, and getting started was probably the biggest hurdle, and learning how to actually take these resources that are out there, take Adam Spriggs and Greg Giffords and all these other blogs and articles that are out there, and taking that and putting that into practice, how to actually set those things up. And once you get past that first initial hurdle, it really is kind of just doing a lot of Googling and finding those endpoints that you need to use and how to actually interact with them, and learning what else you can do with it.
And celebrate the first time you authenticate, because that's almost the hardest part, is figuring out how to authenticate. That first time that you authenticate in the Marketing Cloud, stand up and do a victory dance, because you have earned it.
Yes. So I mean, it's really a lot of trial by fire right now, and it's the article space and the resources space is getting much, much better with getting that initial setup more detailed out and more explained. So
okay, Thank you both. The next question is around API clients and tools. What would you recommend to use to interact with the Marketing Cloud APIs, paid or free, with configs, pros and cons, and yeah, what would you use for a demo environment and for debugging methods? So that's a rather broad question. So let's just go back to what sort of API clients and tools would you recommend using to interact with the Marketing Cloud APIs?
I use Postman. It's been tried and true and never let me down. I know there's a few others out there. I'm trying to think. There's a Google plugin that you can do, or an extension that you don't even have to download a tool. And then as far as for debugging troubleshooting, I usually go to Stack Exchange, because I can usually type in whatever error I get back. Make sure that you are checking whatever it is that's returned. So as you're trying to authenticate or whatever piece you're trying to do, there will be a message that is returned. And so that's what you can actually go in and plug into, say, Stack Exchange to find your answer.
Yeah, I'm also a really big proponent of Postman. And that's one of those tools that, as I was starting with interacting with these APIs and trying to test some things out, I had initially thought it was not super useful. I was like, I don't know why I would really utilize Postman when I can throw it in a cloud page. But as I continue to work with the APIs more, Postman has really kind of been very instrumental in, setting up that first initial call to actually see what you can get from that endpoint and see what your JSON data looks like, to actually not waste a lot of time trying to just power through it on a cloud page.
And all of these
I
tools
agree.
usually work for both SOAP and REST.
Yes.
As a note.
Yep. And I also agree with the Stack Exchange being a very, very helpful resource for understanding and figuring out some error messaging and how to troubleshoot them. And then a quick plug as well. We actually had just posted a basics article on debugging server-side JavaScript on howtosfmc.com. So there's got some really basic tips in there, and some getting started on debugging that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, and another plug for Greg Gifford, and I'm going to mispronounce the name of his website, but Tony, can you pronounce the name of his? Is it Gordon?
I don't.
I'm not even gonna try.
I need to find a link to it all the time. I can't even spell it.
He has a quick how-to about how to use Postman, and how to connect with the Marketing Cloud APIs using Postman, and a quick how-to setup on his blog. I will throw a link in there because I see someone asked, where do you put the code in Postman to write the APIs? And I think that would be the best place to go see instructions on how to do that. So I'll put a link to that in there in just a little bit.
Yeah, his walkthrough is great.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one that I send to teams all the time, even when my team at Calaris sometimes has to troubleshoot with our new rollout of Sitecore. I'll send them to Greg sometimes just when I don't have time.
So just before we keep moving on, in the questions panel, there's a question in here regarding setting up for API calls and where do you do API calls and write your code within Marketing Cloud. Before we move on, I want to address that. So in Marketing Cloud, you can do a lot of testing and writing on a cloud page. And that's very, very helpful when you are trying to debug your code and trying to set up your initial code. And then if you need to run it in another environment, you could also run that in an automation script activity. So that way you don't have to necessarily use super messages or run it on a cloud page.
Yeah, that is a good
to do
tip.
everything within Marketing Cloud instead of doing an API. That's where you would use WS Proxy, and you would do like a web collector or some type of collect URL, and then do a post to the site and then pull everything out. But if you're wanting to be secure, that's when you would go with an API, because you can't be as secure passing data through a URL as you can with an API.
And in the Marketing Cloud, you could utilize not only cloud pages, but you could also utilize script activities inside of the Automation Studio if you want to make API calls from there as well. Just want to point that out. Okay, moving on. Sorry, I lost my notes here. Okay, this one's kind of broad, so if you guys want to narrow it down the best you can, or just throw some ideas out there, and like I said, this is broad, so we can circle back to this at the end if we have time. How can we use the Marketing Cloud API, or how can we get the most out of the Marketing Cloud API? Or two questions that came in. So what are some of your ideas about what would you use it for, or what would you use the SOAP or the REST for, both?
So we actually use our API for a few different use cases. We obviously do all of our transactional emails. They come from our website and our e-commerce platform, and we send them out from Marketing Cloud. So we send all of our transactional data encrypted and secured through the API to a triggered data extension. We also take all of our review data as it's submitted, and we feed over any of our 4- and 5-star, what's considered a high quality review, so that we can use it within any of our content real time. And then we also take our reviews and we trigger a promotion as people, not our service reviews. So we have our product reviews and our service reviews, because I'm in retail. So for our service reviews, we then actually use the API to trigger off a promotion codes to anybody that has probably a 1- or 2-star rating, where they're still unsatisfied after their initial interaction with our company, especially right now during COVID, while we're sometimes our hold times have gotten up to like a couple hours on accident, just because we're limited on who we have on staff, and when there's an influx of calls, there's only so much we can do. So we try and make up for it.
Yeah, this is an area that I kind of nerd out a little bit on the what can you do with APIs and that kind of stuff, because I've been doing a lot of creating of assets from the REST APIs right now. So you can create anything from code snippet blocks to essentially you name it, images, emails, everything. So that's one of the use cases that I've been using the APIs for, and then also surfacing a lot of asset metadata to use for other needs as well.
Okay. Yeah, and there's lots of things you can do with the APIs.
Yeah.
So get creative, have some fun with it. Okay, next question. This is more of a best practice or a basics question. How many, what's the maximum number of connections you can make using the Marketing Cloud API? Is there a max, or is there a limit or a recommended limit for the number of calls per hour one can make for, let's say, a triggered send definition? Maybe that's more of a question for our technical meetup on Thursday.
Yeah, I'm not too sure at the limits surrounding the API calls, to be perfectly honest.
And it is
The
in
only
the
time I've really
documentation.
run into limits has been working with Sales Cloud, where they have a limit on the number of times that we could pass. But as far as limiting the numbers, I mean, we haven't ever capped out on Black Friday. So I think it's more kind of what you're able to what your company is able to actually send over, more so than what Marketing Cloud is able to handle. Because I have
and I've never
brands that all on Black Friday are all shopping. So I can tell you that we do hammer the API on Black Friday weekend, along with many, 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 many other retail companies. So Salesforce is well equipped. I would say you'd have to get up into the billions within an hour to really start causing any problems.
Yeah, and I've never seen a limit on the triggered send definition or the triggered sends as well. I know that was called out in a question here in the call. Yeah, I've never seen that limit hit. So if anybody has, please make note, and we will find out. But also, we do have a technical marketers meetup that includes one of our Salesforce experts coming up on Thursday, and they will be more than happy to answer those sorts of questions regarding platform limitations. All right.
So we have a note in here on the questions regarding the limits. So apparently for SOAP, there is a soft limit of 2,000 calls per minute. And then Marcus, I believe, had posted a Stack Exchange article around the limits as well. So we can include that in the notes as well.
I see those down there. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Jordan. Appreciate that. Yep. Community effort here, guys. We love that. Thank you for being part of it. All right. So next question. When to best utilize the SOAP versus the REST, and should we utilize V1 versus V2? I believe that's an authentication question.
So to start, V1 is pretty much deprecated. So you should only have the option now. If you are to create an endpoint, it will only give you the option for V2. So unless you have an old package from, I believe, before 2017-ish, then you do not have the option to use V1 for any of your API calls to start. Other than that, I mean, a lot of it depends on your company and the way that they're structured and their platforms. We use REST within Caleris for most of ours, but a lot of times it also depends on what you're wanting to do. But that has become a moot point as they've started replacing a lot of SOAP-only items with REST equivalents as they update them. So as REST becomes more and more robust, you're starting to be able to pick either one, but it's eventually going to probably be where most of what you want to do is within REST, just because that's becoming the more powerful of the two. But there will always be use cases for SOAP as well.
It will be a wonderful day when all of these SOAP APIs are translated over to the REST API. Hopefully.
Yeah. And that's definitely a forward-looking statement by Tony there. Want to call that out. Okay. The next question I'm going to pull from our question log here, and it's regarding authentication to a or installation of the API package, where it should be installed. If you want to use the API in the child business unit in an enterprise account, where should you install the API package? Should it be installed in the parent, or should at the top level, or should it be installed at the child level?
We'd use it in actually every account. It really depends on what you're doing. So if you're going to be triggering, say, an email out of one of your child accounts, you're going to need to enable the endpoint in the child account because the parent account can't access the child account and send an email on its behalf unless it's sending as the parent account. If everything you're doing is just inserting data, such as doing data loading that Tony was talking about a little bit ago as one of his use cases, that you could just do at the parent level, and you could always trickle it down via queries or filtering or however your company wants to do it.
Now this is interesting, Jimson, and I'm going to expand upon this a little bit further. I don't know if you guys see this question in here. Jimson is asking, whenever using journey builder interactions, the events trigger, the REST API endpoint, the events API endpoint, it says that Salesforce support says that you cannot cross a child BU, i.e. the endpoint authentication. But I believe you can with WS Proxy. Is that not correct, Karina?
You can with WS Proxy, but that's all internal. That's not external to the system. So basically you're doing it on like a cloud page or a script activity. So if you are within your environment, you can cross BUs. Outside of your environment, you cannot cross BUs.
Yeah, so good question. Thank you for asking that, Jimson.
Yep, great question.
And going back to our sheet here, the initial questions and getting started, can someone without a knowledge of API or without a knowledge of coding set up an API connection? What's your guys' opinion on that?
I think as far as the installed package, absolutely. You know, back when I had first started out in Marketing Cloud, anything, and our developers needed an API integration, you know, it's not it's a little bit daunting and a little bit confusing the first 2 or 3 times you do it, but once you start understanding what the actual installed package is, how to manage the scope of that package, and things around all of that, setting up that actual package is not a very heavy burden to take on.
And definitely utilize Trailhead, because there are some API trails
Yes.
now. So if you have no coding experience whatsoever and you don't want to be dangerous, I would highly encourage at least going and educating yourself on the APIs via Trailhead.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I agree with
absolutely.
that.
Those trails are
Absolutely.
good. Yeah. And expanding upon that just a little bit, if they have multiple installed packages, is there a way to track if and where an installed package is being used? It seems here there's a situation where they have multiple installed packages, and there seems to be a redundancy, and he's wondering if he can delete them, but he's not sure how to track to see which ones are actually being utilized.
I know services can pull that for you. They can see who has, or what IP address has hit what endpoint, but I don't know of a way within the UI.
Yeah, I've not seen anything within the UI or have not come across anything on a public API endpoint that is documented to be able to get any information around the installed packages themselves. But I do feel
What I
like,
do when I inherit an old stack that's been around for a long time is I do go in and ask services to basically pull me all the IP addresses
yeah,
that are hitting our endpoints and basically do an audit. So if you haven't done that before, I highly encourage that you do that as part of your education about your API. Well, in addition to this and the trailheads. But yeah, it's always great to know where all of your endpoints are being accessed. And you should have a list from your IT team or be able to access somewhere. They should know all the IP addresses that your company is using. Otherwise,
Hopefully,
you get to start a whole new
fingers crossed.
audit process.
I think that's the situation here. They weren't documented, and so he's kind of having to do the research. So yeah, probably reach out to support.
yeah.
Hopefully your networking can at least tell you what IP addresses each system uses.
All right, so back to our question sheet here. Let's see here. Which is better and why? Triggered send versus transactional messaging API. That's a good question. I think they both have their use cases. And the transactional API, I know you can throttle, or you can, it has a, guys help me out here. It has a, words.
That's better response handling, I've been told too. We
Thank
actually
you.
haven't
There you
used it
go.
yet. I've been pushing since it came out for Polaris to update to the transactional API versus our REST API for our transactions. It also basically is a separate area. So right now you have your REST slots, and now there'll be these transaction slots. So basically you get prioritized. So instead of marking your triggered send as a high priority within your normal send, you can now go in and use this transactional send, and basically it gets prioritized above anything that you even have over here in the high.
And I think the transactional message API is pretty new, so still waiting to get some.
I would, if you want to learn more about it, I actually attended at Connections last year, a great session put on by Nordstrom. So if that's a recording somewhere still available, that is actually where I learned everything that I needed to know about the transactional API versus the regular APIs. And they were really happy with their results so far when I got to talk to the team. So if you can find that, and I can even see if I can try and dig it up and post it out in the community after this call. But that was probably one of my favorite sessions last year at Connections, was hearing how Nordstrom implemented the transactional API and the differences they saw.
All right, and now I'm going to take another one from the box. I'm kind of toggling back and forth between the two here. This one's a good one, and I do happen to know it's a question that you're probably going to see on one of the exams if you should happen to become certified at some point. Throwing that out there.
Red flag.
Yep. Pay attention now if you're studying for the exams. So is there a way to know the real-time response if the email is being sent through an API? Was the email sent? Did it bounce, etc.? So is there a way to get a response to confirm that an email has been sent using the APIs? Or is there a way to find out? Okay, so I know the answer to this. Yes, there is.
Go
There
for
is
it.
an
I
endpoint
don't
for
know
you
the
to
answer.
I feel
reach
like I'm
out
talking
to.
too much, so I was going to say the answer.
Sorry, guys. But yeah, there's an endpoint you can reach out to. I'll post the documentation in the notes here so you guys can find that.
And when you're testing within Postman, you'll also get a response.
Yeah.
200. Sorry, it's still early here, but you'll get a success response as well. But if you want more detail, there
Right.
is that endpoint that you retrieve that has the detailed information.
Yeah, you take the order number from the response that you receive from
Yep.
the email that you just triggered, and then place that into the call you make to see the results of that call or that email send. So let's see here. For me, Postman is okay. No, I'm not even going to say that one. Sorry, guys. Let's go back over here. All right. So webhooks. Do we have any information on utilizing webhooks with the Marketing Cloud API? Can you guys expand upon that a little bit?
So I know that you can, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to misspeak too much to this because I've not done too much with webhooks, but I believe there is the event notification endpoint that you can tap into the webhooks with that. Is that accurate, Karina? Do you know?
I believe so. So I actually use WS Proxy for most of my webhooks. Just because I'm not passing anything that I need secured most of the time. It's something that where I use webhooks more when I need to be quick and dirty with an integration. And so, yeah, I usually take a webhook, I throw the data to URL, I put it on a cloud page, and then I let WS Proxy pretend to be an API for me. So as far as utilizing the API, I have not done it personally, but I do believe there are ways to do it. And yeah, the event handler is definitely one of the use cases that I would think of.
All right. Thank you for answering that. Yeah, definitely don't pass anything that's secure.
Yep.
Through URL strings. It's not advised and we'll get you in trouble.
And when I do this, I should also have a caveat that I create kind of my own secure key. So you wouldn't be able to do anything with my webhooks unless you have the key that's within both systems. So I have it hidden within Marketing Cloud, and then I have it within whatever the system is that I'm actually integrating with. So unless those two keys match, nothing will happen, and they'll just get a blank white screen. So even when you're quick and dirty, please make sure you still have some type of secure setup so that no one can hack your system.
Security matters.
Yep.
Especially with all the new data regulations that are coming into place. Okay. Please advise on testing methods for APIs performing jobs on DEs linked to multiple, literally hundreds of live forms. So how would you test your APIs that are linked to live forms?
Are they talking about making sure that the data is coming in clean, or
I believe so.
That's okay. Because I say one of the things that we always do is we make sure that there's a source on every API call if it's from a form. So I can go in and just basically query for whatever source it is that I think is in question and be able to pull that data that way and segment. As far as making sure that everything is hitting your data extension, that you would go in, and if the data is not there, then you need to go in and make sure that basically you've set up your data types to match. And a lot of that is where you would go to Stack Exchange and kind of look at all the different errors that you can find. Or you can even go to within the developer documentation, there is a page under the APIs that's just all of your error codes as well that you can look up. So if you're getting a 400 error, you're probably not authenticating. If you're getting an error after that, then you probably have the wrong data type or the wrong data extension if you're trying to hit one that doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, a lot of it is just kind of coding from the beginning to make sure that you can go in and audit afterwards.
Yeah, that's accurate. It's making sure your foundation for those forms are set up, appropriately from the start. And, unfortunately, a lot of us walk into existing implementations and existing setups that, we had no hand in setting up, and we don't know how the development side of it on the actual web forms are set up. So, yeah, it can be a struggle sometimes for sure.
All right, so this is going back to our Postman setup. If someone who hasn't used Postman before or has dug into the APIs at all, would you recommend downloading Postman, or can you just use do an online account? Use an online account.
I would personally recommend downloading it and setting up your environments. Greg Gifford actually has a phenomenal introduction to Postman article that goes through setting up your install package and setting up your Postman instance with your environment and variables and things like that. That I believe is actually hosted on his site as well as the How To SFMC site. It's a great resource, and that's where I point anybody getting started with Postman to go, to be perfectly honest. So
yeah, that is a great article, and I've already posted it further up in the answers someplace, but I will try to find that question again, and there it is, and I'm posting it now there as well, so you can see where to go set up your environments and all that good stuff, because that's a great how-to for getting started. All right. Is the API callout the only way to update profile attributes from all subscribers besides imports? That's an interesting question. Are there other ways to update profile attributes from all subs besides the API and besides imports? Is that the question, or is it? I think it's more about what endpoints can you use to update all subscribers, guys. And I believe that's the SOAP.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I believe that's the SOAP API. Although I believe you can do the contact setup or schema setup now through REST, can't you? To also, sorry, I'm trying to pop over my Postman and see if I can grab my, look at my files real quick and tell you. But the contact schema should also have a way. We don't do too much of updating all subscribers because we have an external system that we use as our database of record. So we actually have everything turned off within our triggers, where it gives you the option to either turn on or off to update all subscribers at the same time, and we actually have that disabled.
Speaking of external data sets, do you have an integration with Salesforce.com, or can you guys speak to how to integrate Salesforce Marketing Cloud with the core systems or the core clouds?
Most of the core clouds now have connectors, either through the distributed sending or the Marketing Cloud connector. So you don't have too much API work that you would have to do, especially for like Sales and Service Cloud. You do have to pay attention to your limits on the API calls that are set from Sales Cloud to Marketing Cloud, because you can run into those limits. And those are a lot easier to go over than, say, your regular transactional and day-to-day API trigger calls, because I have run into that before at previous employers where we've been too popular with syncing our data to Marketing Cloud and we ran out for the day. And I think we even blew through almost a year's worth in like 6 months, because as we grew out our marketing program, we did not grow out our number of API calls that we had purchased. But yeah, so for the most part, Salesforce has really tried to make it a point to integrate those where you don't need an API.
Mm-hmm. The connector is pretty easy to connect and install as well, so it's
and it's becoming part of most certifications too. So I recommend that if you are going to get certified, that you definitely get to know the connector.
Yeah, I think there's some good Trailhead stuff on the connector and setting that up as well. So it's a really, really great resource to at least get familiar with it if you've never actually hands-on used it. I think those badges are pretty robust too.
They are, agreed.
Yeah, the only exception would be maybe if you need to do like a triggered send. That's kind of one-off, that sometimes you use like Apex within Sales Cloud to create those triggers. But other than that, it should all be able to be done through the connector.
All right. And, okay, so talk about super messages real quick. Does Cloud Pages consume super messages for API calls? That's a great question.
Yes.
They do.
Yes, they do.
They do.
Yes, they do.
Taking consideration.
And a live form in your email. But it does definitely consume a super message for each time that it's rendered.
Yes. Which is another reason to use which is another reason to use a mocking tool like Postman or something like that, so you can get majority of the way there without having to churn through a lot of super messages trying to debug and just get things to work.
And let's see here. Speaking of debugging, general tips around error handling when an API post fails. What are you guys' recommendations there on how to deal with errors?
Well, most of the time,
troubleshooting through them.
we were saying a little earlier, you either take your error and you can go plug it into Google or even Stack Exchange, and you'll find other people who have run into it. I have found with my company, they make the same error every time. So you'll start to get to know that, say, like 400 error. Oh, my team has a 400 error. They forgot that we have to use V2 endpoints now. Because that's what we always do. Is now that we've created all of our new packages with V2, they still try and use our V1 authentication package that they coded back in 2015. So one of the first things I have to do is remind them to change out our authentication. Then if we get to like a 400, or then if we get to a new error, once they've authenticated, then it's usually a data type that doesn't match between our external system and our internal system. So a lot of times, once you start getting to really to know your API, especially within your company, you'll really start to see that it's a lot of the same issues over and over again. And you'll start to recognize that, oh, this error probably means this. In the meantime, definitely go out. I mean, because yeah, we've got Greg, we've got Adam, we've got Tony, myself, Susanna, Jenna. I mean, there's so many people out on Stack Exchange that are more than happy to help you because we've all battled the API. And many of us had done this back even before they had replaced most of SOAP with REST. So a lot of times we had to straddle both in order to get it to work many years ago. So we're more than happy to help you be successful.
Yeah, and if you're not on Stack Exchange, most of us, if not all of us, are actually on Slack as well.
Email Geeks.
If you're not on the Email Geeks Slack community, I highly, highly recommend jumping on there. Feel free to shoot one of us a message. You know, we're always willing to help out, you know, and troubleshoot stuff.
Yep. Same with Twitter,
Absolutely.
LinkedIn. We're everywhere.
Yeah, we're everywhere.
Yeah. And Women of Email, if you're happen to be in that group as well, you can find Karina and myself there, and Susanna and Gilda and others to help you out as well. So there's plenty of avenues to reach us.
Quite a few other marketing champions that are technical that we're going to be bringing in as part of this Q&A and the regular developer office hours as well, so that you guys can start getting to know more of the technical people that are out there, so that you have more resources to go to.
Absolutely.
And if you want to be on one of these, be sure to let Gilda know.
All right. So Journey Builder, is there any way to write API calls in Journey Builder?
You can write API calls to Journey Builder, but not in Journey Builder. Correct?
Would you be able to with a custom activity though?
A custom activity you can.
Yeah. Custom journey activity you would
absolutely.
Be able to. But that's a whole nother hurdle to jump through. And I think there was a recorded session on that topic previously as well. So
there was, you can go back to, and we did a technical marketers group about that, so you can go back and check that recording out and learn about that. But I think you can, if you really want to get a little bit hacky as well, there are API functions with AmpScript that you can use from within an email as well to make calls out to do certain things.
Yeah, but there's not like a canvas step that you can just drag on.
There is not. Absolutely not. It's not just a simple process, and you can use SSJS as well to make some API calls from within an email or within an activity.
Yep.
And Journey Builder, but again, that's a little bit more complicated. It's not a drag and drop.
And all of
solution.
those will slow down your processing as well.
They will, and they do count
you will have
super messages, and you will consider pricing and things like that too. All right. Can we create a Salesforce object using APIs from Marketing Cloud? So talking about integrating with the Salesforce API again. I know you can create a Salesforce object using AmpScript, the AmpScript API functions from the Marketing Cloud. I'm not sure about using the rest or the SOAP. Guys, do you know
Sales Cloud has their own APIs. that you would use to create an object. You wouldn't use the Marketing Cloud SOAP or REST API. They would have their own functions, and you would have to go and look at their library and see what it is that they need to do. And that's mostly, I believe, through Apex more, and then whatever other codes that you kind of use within your company. But yeah, there's definitely not like a REST call that says to make a Salesforce Sales Cloud object.
Let's see here. How do you have no errors in the APIs? I think we've gone over that a couple of times. There is some documentation around the different types of error codes that you get from the APIs in the wiki and the Salesforce Marketing Cloud wiki developer documentation. So check out those error codes there. Let's see here.
And I actually have the error code as a shortcut, basically, because I know that anytime I'm testing, I'm going to end up breaking something. So I just keep that as basically in a Salesforce Marketing Cloud dev folder, and that's one of my shortcuts that I always have. So
smart to have.
Yep. Yes. Don't be ashamed if you need to look up error codes, because everyone breaks things. And
error
I love breaking things. That's why I'm very
endpoints.
Endpoints, yeah.
Endpoints, everything.
Yep. Everything, yep. Yeah. And Google is
literally
your friend.
Everything.
Yeah. We all keep all those open regularly on our screens here. Okay, so can we block outbound API calls? No calls to go out from Marketing Cloud at all. Client has some security concerns. So is there a way to block outbound API calls from the Marketing Cloud?
Not that I'm aware of. Doesn't mean that there's
probably
not,
can
but
through
I'm not
services.
sure.
It would be a business rule, most likely, that they would have to turn. So that's definitely something. Go ahead and file with support. I would guess that there are, because there's a lot probably smaller businesses that don't even have that capability turned on. Sorry, it's been many years since I've used kind of the lower non-enterprise accounts, but I believe some of those do limit APIs unless you add it on as an additional SKU. So I believe they can turn it off. But it is something that's done platform side by Salesforce themselves. I don't believe it's something you can do within the UI.
Yeah, and I think also permissions inside of your admin panel, you can.
Yep, that's true. You can, yeah,
disable users.
As well.
Yeah, would be another way to revoke permissions. So if you're an admin, yeah. How to fully leverage WS Proxy? That's kind of a vague question there, but how would you guys go about accessing WS Proxy?
I mean, that's a lot of times what I do is I try and figure out if it's something that I want to do with an API, but I know that my company is not going to have the bandwidth to create a new API structure for me. Then I go with Proxy. Also, if it's something that I want to do basically that's similar to what I could do via the API faster than having to do something custom within Marketing Cloud, then I go with the proxy on my cloud pages. For example, when we did our Rika giveaway for shoes for nurses during COVID, I used the proxy pieces to actually do all of the inserts and sending of the emails from the form. So that way I didn't have to do a bunch of automation building behind the scenes. Instead, I just inserted into the data extension and then triggered an email, all from one proxy submission. So really, it's kind of looking at your process and seeing if Proxy can make it faster within Marketing Cloud, or if you're limited to not being able to use an API for some reason outside of Marketing Cloud, then the Proxy would be your kind of next best bet. But then you can also be labeled a security risk by your company if you're going and making a bunch of integrations via Proxy instead of going through them, because I know that every time that I do it, I get my hand slapped. Until they realize that they would have had to still build me an API, and they're like, fine, keep it. So make sure you play nice with your IT team if you're not sitting with the IT team.
So most third-party vendors impose a rate limit on the number of REST calls one can make to avoid performance issues. Yep. When making calls to a third-party API from a cloud page or a script activity, how do you handle such rate limits and retry the API calls automatically after the rate limit window expires?
We actually use the responses from our attempts from our API calls, and if it comes back unsuccessful, then we put it in a queue, and then that queue gets reprocessed basically every hour. We haven't actually hit any thresholds yet, knock on wood, so we haven't had to sit there and wait for a certain time period. But I would assume that my IT team would do the same, but just do a wait until instead of reprocessing every hour. But that's where you really depend on that endpoint that Jenna was speaking of to either get you a response on why, or even just we take the basic response if it was unsuccessful. If it doesn't return a 200, then it gets put in the queue to reprocess.
Okay. Sorry, this is worded a little oddly. Okay, how do you use an API with contact delete or to delete a duplicate contact?
So there's actually a dedicated REST API for that. I believe it's contacts, actions, delete, and then you can identify it by your type. So whether it's your ID or your contact key, I believe are the two options for that. And it's pretty well documented on the SFMC docs.
And then Elliot Harper also did a session a few months back in our developer office hours that you should be able to find within the community as well,
Yeah.
where he also mapped out exactly how to do the API version of the contact delete. And if you go to a site, I believe there's also documentation. And there's also a delete contacts and contact builder unit in the Trailhead as well that mentions quickly about the API way of doing it as well. But I would definitely, if you want more detail, go to Elliot's site as a resource after the trail.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any use cases where Marketing Cloud SDKs are used to handle API calls using native languages? Do you guys have any familiarity with the SDKs?
I don't specifically, but I would imagine that the SDKs would be very helpful in starting the process of building external apps to it. From my understanding, they're kind of a good starting point and a good base to build off of.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak to the full robustness of the SDKs for each language, but I do know that they do serve a really solid functionality.
We use the SDKs for our app for Famous Footwear and then also for mobile messaging.
There you go.
So those are our use cases.
Tracking extracts. That was a good one I can call out real quick. You can use some as SDKs for tracking extracts too. Okay. But yeah, building external apps. All right, how do you trigger an email record in Salesforce?
You can do that.
Sorry, this is worded odd too. How to trigger an email while recording in Salesforce DE, will it be inserted or updated? Okay, so let's talk about the process behind a triggered send.
Yeah, because you can do either. You can update or you can insert. It's really in your API call what you decide that you want to do. I do know that for us, for the way that we use our APIs, we always do an insert because we always want to keep the records separate by date to be able to do any tracking for compliance. So it's really up to your company how you want to handle that data, if you want to do an insert or an update. But if you have anything where you need to go back and be able to look up that date on what happened the first time, then you do not want to do any type of update. You want to insert a new row every time. Because otherwise you've lost any tracking history for compliance if you were to ever have something come up where you were sued or somebody was questioning what you did with your data. And then as far as the actual sending, there's a few different versions because you can send via both REST and SOAP, and then you have your triggered send, or you can actually do not a user initiated send, but basically a regular send as well. So you can do a commercial send, or you can do a transactional/triggered send within. And then there's examples on how to do each within most of the resources that we've mentioned.
And then of course you have your journey entry endpoint too.
Yes, and then you have a journey that you can fire as well.
All right, this is an interesting question. What is the default response time for a single call? I think it depends. You guys, what do you guys think on that one?
Can you repeat it one more time? So the response
What is
time?
what is the default response time expected for a single call? So I'm assuming it depends on what you're trying to do, as to how long it'll
I
take
mean,
for
you should
that
pretty
call.
much get a response immediately. As soon as it hits
Yeah.
the system, it's going to tell you at least that it authenticated or not. And then from there, it'll tell you for your next step if you successfully sent an email or inserted. Either way, you shouldn't be waiting minutes to get a response
No.
back for whatever it is that you submitted.
Okay. And yeah, I'll get that endpoint over to you guys in the notes afterwards. Trying to get all your questions answered first. But that will come over in the notes after all the documentation that we've talked about. We'll send you guys a recap with lots of links in there to get everybody started. Would you recommend to start with Postman rather than Mulesoft to manage an API with Salesforce? It's an interesting question.
So I
I
think,
believe
it depends on what you're doing.
don't you?
yeah, Mulesoft is a paid service, and I have not done a whole lot hands-on with Mulesoft. I did do some research for them or with them quite some time ago when they first were integrated. But from my understanding, Mulesoft is more of a full-on API management where you have multiple API coming into Marketing Cloud. And Postman is more of a mocking tool and a testing tool. So I think they're two different use cases in two different areas. Is that, would you agree with that, Karina and Jenna?
Yeah, and it depends on what you're trying to do too. I mean, MuleSoft, like it is, of course, it's now owned by Salesforce, so it's part of the universe. But
Well,
I
my
think
understanding was MuleSoft. It's not so much that you're writing code; it's you're kind of
it's a
mapping, like
connector.
where you're picking a field and you're picking a field, and then they
It's
map.
correct.
So if you
It's
use like
mapping.
Contact Builder for journey entry data, it's basically the same as creating contact schema,
Yes,
where you just pick
correct.
two pieces and then they map them together for you. So if you're really wanting to be able to have more control and be able to update the code yourself, that's where you would go with Postman. In addition to not wanting to spend money, I'm cheap, so I use free tools whenever I can.
Oh, and Karina, you mentioned a 400 error earlier. Was that the common mention, the error you mentioned earlier in the call?
I believe so. I was trying to find my error page so I could look at what all the different ones are.
And again, we'll send that over in the in our recap here after the call and the recording of the session, so you guys can have all that information. Okay, we're going to try to last few questions here. We're going to wrap it up. We're running short on time, about 5 minutes left. Let's see here. Is it possible to perform an asynchronous API call in SSJS? Or I believe you mean AMP script, not AMP. Salesforce doesn't have the capability to use the AMP MIME type yet. So is it possible to perform an asynchronous API call in SSJS or AMP script?
I mean, technically, yes, because I use SSJS to use WS Proxy. So, I mean, it really depends on what tool. Anything that you do within your system is going to package up the call into whatever it is for the schema that is the way that you send it over. So however you build your data and your form, whatever it is, you're going to translate it into your package that you then send over to Marketing Cloud. So however you want to build it. So we use SSJS, we use .NET, we have some C+ that we use. We have a few different coding tools that we use within, or languages, sorry, that we use within Caleris, and all of them then translate into a package that is sent over via API into Marketing Cloud. So you can really start with whatever language you're most comfortable with, and then in the end, you will translate that into the package that is sent.
Okay, this is an interesting one. And then we're going to wrap it up with 2 more questions. All right, so I know Raise Error uses a super message. Is there any other function workarounds to handle errors, error use cases when using AMP script? That's an interesting question. So we're back to the AMP script a little bit here with the AMP script APIs. So I'm assuming you were talking about a cloud page testing. Is there any way to get around using a super message when testing an API on a cloud page AMP script, I'm thinking?
Well, if you're using an API, depending on what you're doing, you don't need a cloud page. If you're just inserting straight into a data extension to trigger an email, that would not use a super message. That would just go towards your API allocation that you have in your contract. The only time I would use a super message is, say, if you have something in the email that's using a super message, or if you're doing like a cloud page. But yeah, I would be curious to kind of hear your use case of what you're doing, and then from there I could kind of help figure it out. But for the most part, if I'm using an API, I try and avoid using a cloud page, because whatever I'm doing is usually from a landing page on my website, or some type of external form, some type of external something, so that instead of that cloud page. Because if I was using the cloud page, then I would be within the ecosystem already and within the org, and so I wouldn't need an API call.
One last question: is there an option to update a record directly from DE to Salesforce.com, to a Salesforce.com record, instead of using a Journey Builder activity or AMP script from an email? So can you make an API call from Salesforce Marketing Cloud to Salesforce.com to move data from a data extension into a .com record?
Yes, and that's where you would have to learn the Sales Cloud side of the API again. Because you would just take whatever data, and that wouldn't really, once again, you would kind of package it up into whatever the API is for Sales Cloud. So you wouldn't use our functions and schema for Marketing Cloud. You would use whatever for Sales or Service Cloud, and you'd have to know that object and the record and the field. Sorry, I can't remember what all the different pieces are within.
You don't have to, but you have to know that side of it. Yeah, exactly.
You have to know that whole path.
Yeah, exactly. And we're talking about the Marketing Cloud on this side, so not quite. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Karina, for answering everybody's questions. And thank you, Gilda, for organizing everything, and Salesforce for sponsoring and hosting this. We appreciate everybody that attended, joining today, and we will send out the recording with all those links that we've talked about today tomorrow, so you'll get all that. And remember to register. There is a webinar on Thursday. We're going to be talking about distributed marketing. That's going to be very exciting.
I'm excited. I'm going to
learn.
As
I am. Yeah, exactly. Karina and I are super stoked about that one. So join us all on Thursday to talk about distributed marketing at the Technical Marketers Meetup. And